Okay, hi everyone. Today we will begin our week of discussing the Persian Empire and their interactions and role against the Greeks and with the Greeks. So we'll talk today about how Persia, where it's located, and how it became an empire, how it became organized and united. So it began with its founding ruler, like the George Washington of the United States. The George Washington of the Persian Empire was named Cyrus, and eventually he goes by the name Cyrus the Great. So in 550 BCE, Cyrus leads a revolt against a group of people that have been ruling the area for 150 years, and his victory over these people begins the Persian Empire. So he's the founder, okay? He started it. So what he did is he marched his army to then conquer most of Southwest Asia, and that's a large area that you'll see on the map in a moment. But this area specifically includes Asia Minor, which is modern-day Turkey that we've examined, and Mesopotamia. And this is the extent of the entire Persian Empire. But Cyrus conquered this area, most of Asia Minor right here, Mesopotamia, and this area is the native area of Persia. It's Iran today. This today would be Afghanistan, and this is the western side of India. So really, he conquered most of this territory, very large area. And later on, other rulers after him would conquer the rest of Asia Minor and the beginnings of this portion of Macedonia in Europe, a little bit of Greece right there, and this is Egypt. That would happen later. Cyrus didn't conquer that area. But this is a uniquely large area of territory for an empire, okay? And you'll see why he's called the Great. So why Cyrus became great, okay? Not everyone in history holds that title. He is known as Cyrus the Great, not just because he conquered the largest empire in the world at that time in history, which we just saw, but for the way that he ruled those areas. Cyrus, see, what he did, he didn't demand ultimate control over everything in everyone's lives. That's a really good way to make enemies. And once you conquer a people and no longer want to be their enemy, the more control that you attempt to have over their lives, the less they're going to enjoy you as their ruler, and the more time they're going to put into having anger and animosity and jealousy towards you, and they're going to want to be violent towards you and rise up and rebel against you. So what Cyrus did, which is like really something pretty unique for this time period, Cyrus, as a very powerful ruler, actually gave up some of that power by allowing the people he conquered to keep their own customs. So this is an important vocab word we'll talk about with Persia. Customs. Okay? Customs are, this is the definition, they are your way of life, such as religion, language, and foods that you eat. And pretty much these are ways of living that are handed down from the past, from your ancestors. Customs are what defines a people. They're worth dying over in most cases, in most instances that you'll find out. So for Cyrus to allow these people that he's conquered to keep their customs, he's really saying, I respect your individuality. I respect who you are before I came here, and now that I'm your ruler, you do have to answer to me. You do need to, pay me taxes and fight in my army if I demand it. But otherwise, I mean, I don't want to Cyrus didn't really want to change your lifestyle all that much. And that's a really cool way to rule. It's the reason why he could unite an area this large and not have very many, if any, rebellions against him for the most part of his career as a ruler. And so this made people much less likely to rebel against Persia and against Cyrus's rule. And rebel means to go against. It means to take up arms against, which is weapons, war, to fight, to kill, to try to overthrow a government. This didn't happen with Cyrus, and in most of Persian history it didn't really happen. It's because Cyrus became great by the way in which he ruled. Okay? So one big takeaway here is how he ruled. He ruled by having a lot of tolerance. Tolerance for, I mean, think of the millions of people that live within these borders of his empire. So many, I mean, thousands of languages, thousands of different groups of people that live in different ways. And it's impressive because he welcomed their differences instead of forcing them to, acclimate or change and absorb the customs of the Persians. If you try to force your way of life and your customs down another group of people's throats that have been living their own way for hundreds and even thousands of years, you're not going to be successful in keeping power. Okay? And so the strength of the Persian army is a way that they conquered that large amount of territory. Okay? And so Cyrus organized this army into a very loyal group. He paid them well, he treated them well, and they were organized into three different, or well, really four different groups. So infantry isn't on this list as a vocab word, but infantry is the foot soldiers, okay, swords and spears. That makes up the majority of your fighting force on the ground. The Persian army, and if you've seen the movie 300, which is where we're moving into this week and next week, that time frame of history, there were 10,000 elite, which means best of the best, like the Marines and Green Beret of the time period, 10,000 elite soldiers with elite skill called immortals. And that's actually an idea from their religion, and just like Greek mythology, where they're not going to die, they're invincible. They weren't invincible, they were human beings, but they were so highly elite and well-trained and loyal, and there were so many of them. 10,000 is an enormous number for any fighting force, and especially just an elite one. So this is the group that he would use to protect him, Cyrus, and the other Persian emperors like Darius or Darius, however you want to pronounce his name. That will come later. We'll talk about him in a moment. That's who would guard the Persian emperor, and this was his elite fighting force. He also had a group that was known as cavalry. We've talked about this year. This is a unit of soldiers, but they ride horses. They fight by riding horses, so it makes them highly mobile, and they can get around really quickly. And then on the battlefield, and then you have the archers, and you would bring the archers in, and these are soldiers who shoot arrows. Having thousands of archers shooting tens of thousands of arrows at a group of enemy soldiers is terrifying. And then once it can really keep that, it's going to keep them busy trying to avoid these arrows and putting their shields over their heads. And while that's happening, you can have the cavalry charge, and they're not seeing what's happening. And this organization of the Persian army was one of its strengths. I would say that one of the strengths was the ability of Cyrus to rule and keep peace within his empire, and the other was the strength was his army. And so this is what the uniform of a Persian immortal would look like, highly decorated, really well armored. Okay, a large sword, they have a spear, they have like an axe or a hatchet, a dagger over here. They were very highly trained in all ways of fighting and all of the weapons. Okay, then you have just the archers, and these were Persian archers, and they have their bow, they have a spear, and they would have their arrows right here. And this is actually a relief. This is, if you can see, it's bricks and stone, almost like frescoes from the Minoans. Okay, and then you have the cavalry, which are Persians who are not as heavily armored because they'd be heavy, but they have spears and axes and even arrows as well, and they're riding on horseback, which makes them very deadly, very fast. So after Cyrus dies, his son takes over, and after him, there's a lot of rebellion because there's a weak leader. And so what happens is Darius the First claims the throne by killing his enemies. Okay, after Cyrus's and his son's death. And so what he did was he maintained this extremely strong army, and he expanded these extremely vast borders by conquering Egypt, the rest of Asia Minor, and Macedonia, where Thrace is right here, Macedonia, and some of very southeastern Europe. And he did this by organizing his empire. And this is really critical to understand about why he is so famous. So he created 20 provinces. And provinces are just like states. Like Massachusetts is one of 50 states in the United States of America. So provinces are smaller portions of his empire. And I'll show you what it looks like. I have a map right here. Okay? All of these provinces. All right? These are all different provinces. This was Persia itself, which is Iran today. That's like the homeland where the capital Persepolis was located. But all of these little provinces are like little mini countries within the vast Persian Empire. And each of them is ruled by a governor. And the Persian word for a governor was a satrap. Now, each satrap rules that area with ultimate authority. They answer to literally only one person, and that was the emperor, Cyrus, or Darius. At this time, it's Darius the First. So think of it like Mr. Williams. He's the Darius. He's the emperor of all of Heath Middle School, the whole building. And each classroom is a province, and each teacher is the governor or the satrap. And I rule my province my way. But I do so understanding that the ultimate boss is Mr. Williams, or is the emperor, Darius. Okay? And so since Darius is only one man, just like Mr. Williams is only one man, Mr. Williams cannot split his body in half or in 50 different pieces and be everywhere at once. Therefore, his governors, his teachers, rule in his place. And in ancient Persia, in the empire, they would also collect the taxes, keep some for themselves, and send the rest to the emperor. That is the political organization. That is how you rule an area, an empire that is this vast. Because this is thousands of miles of Persian territory to rule. One man can't do it himself. You might ask what Darius is doing during this time. He's not just sitting around eating grapes and telling people what to do. He's visiting the, different provinces, and he's making sure that his satraps are loyal to him. And therefore, he calls himself, and he's referred to in history, but he referred to himself as the King of Kings, to remind others of his power. You might rule as a satrap, like a mini-king in one of these territories, like Babylon right here, or Assyria, or Egypt, or Libya, wherever it might be, Bactria, right? But you better remember who's actually in charge and who gave you those powers. And you hold power with the Persian army, which is Darius's army. And this is these are coins of some of the satraps from different provinces. This is stone carving, a relief of Darius himself, with his crown, long hair, very long beard. Okay? And so Darius is able to build upon the achievements of Cyrus by truly allowing the Persian people that are conquered. You're not very happy when someone conquers you, but Darius allowed them to retain their customs and their way of life, and that's all really people want. If you've conquered them and they're paying taxes for you and they die in your army, if you ask them to fight for you, they have to. Other than that, really it's like, let them live their life their way. They're giving you what they need. They're loyal to you. They're not rebelling against you. Why force anything else upon them? And by doing that, Darius was able to control this territory and expand it. And by keeping people loyal, those governors called satraps, he was able to keep power in a vast, vast empire. And he was referred to as the King of Kings. You are now going to go into Google Classroom, and you have some questions and a bit of text to read.